looking at the architecture.
I asked what your plan for the
100
summer.
schools by the end of the summer.
We're gonna go into the restroom.
Okay.
I'll go with you.
Your date looks so familiar to me.
She looks familiar to a lot of people.
What do you mean?
A Stanford MBA named Roy Raymond wants to buy his wife some lingerie, but he's too embarrassed to shop for it in a department store. Comes up with an idea for a high-end place that doesn't make you feel like a pervert. He gets a $40,000 bank loan, borrows another $40,000 from his in-laws, opens a store and calls it Victoria's Secret. Makes $500,000 his first year. Starts a catalog, opens 3 more stores, and after 5 years, he sells the company to Leslie Wexner and The Limited for $4 million. Happy ending, right? Except 2 years later, the company's worth $500 million, and Roy Raymond jumps off the Golden Gate Bridge. Poor guy just wanted to buy his wife a pair of thigh highs, you know?
Was that a parable?
My date's a Victoria's Secret model. That's why she looks familiar to you.
God.
Don't be impressed by all this. I read your blog.
No, that was for web cretins.
You know why I started Napster? The girl I loved in high school.
Lucas still couldn't believe the change in Hannah. She was a woman now, undisputably. The last time he'd seen her, on a rare visit back to Santander, she'd been coltish, even still at 18, not fully grown into her curves. He felt a bit stupid, but since when did she possess breasts and hips, and that waist that looked like the width of his hand? Her face had lost its childishness too, revealing high cheekbones and a delicate jaw. Straight nose. Had her mouth always been so provocatively lush? But one thing hadn't changed, those huge expressive dark brown eyes and long luxurious lashes. She'd always looked at him in a way that made him feel somehow restless, as if she could see right into him, right down deep to where his darkness was buried. The darkness of pain and grief and anger and loss. She'd been achingly familiar to him, and yet a stranger. One that had caused his pulse to trip when he'd first caught a glimpse of her on the edge of the room. Not appropriate. Hannah was like family to him, since her family had taken him in all those years ago. And yet, as she'd reminded him 6 years ago, I'm not your sister. He'd been visiting Santander briefly. It had been 6 years since Danilo's death, 6 years since Lucas had left and forged another path, and yet it had felt as raw and painful as if it had just happened, mocking his hopes that perhaps time would have dulled the pain. It had been Hannah's 18th birthday when she told him that she loved him. Her eyes had shone with such fervor, gold and brown. There had been something so innocent and trusting in her expression, and it had chafed painfully against the ever-present grief and guilt he'd still felt over her brother's death, even though rationally he knew that there was little he could have done to prevent Danilo's death. Lucas knew he'd avoided returning to Santander in the last 6 years largely because of Hannah's emotional outburst, and the sense of being a coward had just added on top of the layers of guilt and grief. He'd never been able to get Hannah's face out of his head, her declaration of love. But now she was different. Of course, she no longer harbored those feelings. She must have a boyfriend. She might even be engaged. So why was it that thought didn't bring Lucas a sense of relief, but instead something dark and complicated? Worse, a sense of possession? He tensed inwardly, rejecting the incendiary thought. He couldn't possibly. Lucas? Are we boring you? Lucas blinked. The room he was in came back into focus. The king's advisors were looking at him across a wide table. Sunlight was streaming in through open French doors. The breeze was warm, fragrant with scents of the sea and native flowers. The sense of his youth before tragedy had blighted everything, and yet it still called to him, making him yearn for something he couldn't even articulate. Forgiveness, peace. Lucas cursed his wayward mind and focused on King Aristides, a tall, handsome man who was standing with his hands behind his back near the doors, long legs planted wide. They had a little history because Lucas's father had worked for a time as an economic advisor to the previous king, Aristides' father. After the tragic car accident that had killed Lucas's entire family, the king had offered personal condolences and had attended the funeral with his son, the then crown prince Aristides. Lucas had never forgotten that kind acknowledgement from the royal family. Lucas shook his head. No, not at all, Your Highness. I'm just a little distracted to be home again after 6 years. The king smiled. What took you so long? A pair of expressive dark brown eyes came into Lucas's head. He pushed the image aside. Feeling restless, he stood too, moving to stand near the king. Work, sir, building my business in America. The king said, I've been following your progress for some time now, and I think you're perfectly positioned to consider opening a European hub, specifically in Santander. We would do our utmost to smooth your path back home. Back home? Santander had stopped feeling like home when his family had died, and then just a few years later, his best friend. Lucas knew that this opportunity would be a dream come true to many expats, but his reasons for leaving Santander in the first place still felt all too real. And after meeting Hannah again last night, Lucas knew that his future did not lie in Santander, no matter how much the king might like it to. Still, he had come to listen, and he would do the king the courtesy of hearing him out. But within a couple of days, he would be gone again, back to his life across a vast ocean, putting as much space between him and his demons as he possibly could.